I think innovation is probably a very broad term. What does it actually mean in practice?
When people think innovation, they're often thinking about creativity. They're thinking about coming up with new ideas. But really, that is just creativity. Innovation is more than that. Innovation is about the implementation of those creative ideas in order to really generate value. The biggest failure is then not trying at all. Innovation is always taking a leap of faith because there is always a risk that it's not going to work. But it is about how do you manage that risk most effectively.
You mentioned a lot about getting people to put their heads together, brainstorming, group thinking. Is that usually a good approach?
In some companies, they're told when they enter the organization, you have two jobs. You have a
Muhami Matters with Chris Adams, powered by CJA Consulting.
Welcome to Muhami Matters, where credibility meets clarity in legal and professional services. I'm your host, Chris Adams, founder of Muhami and CJA Consulting. Now, innovation is one of those words that's used constantly in professional services, but really rarely defined. For many firms, it feels quite abstract, risky, or like something that belongs in technology companies rather than law firms or consultancies or other regulated environments. Today's episode is a bit about demystifying that, and I'm proud to be joined by Zena Cox, who's Operations Director at Ideas UK. She works with organisations across the UK and the Middle East to help them build innovation capability in a way that's structured, human-centred and practical. Particularly, Zena works a lot with regulated and high-trust sectors. So we're going to be talking about how innovation actually looks like, or what it looks like in professional services, how it boosts credibility internally and externally, and where leaders should realistically start. So quite a long menu, Zena. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really delighted to be here and share something that I'm very passionate about in terms of innovation.
Well, yeah, before we get to that, tell us a little bit about you. Who are you? What do you do? And I know that you work for a number of organisations, both in the UK and the Middle East.
I do indeed, Chris. So just to give you a little potted history about who I am, I basically did a chemistry degree, which is not, I don't think, a natural bedfellow for innovation. And pretty soon realised that my path was not going to be in a laboratory. So after my chemistry degree, I joined a pharmaceutical company. So I think you mentioned in that intro about regulated industry. So
yes,
certainly the pharma industry is one of those highly regulated industries. So I joined on the commercial side of the organization, so spent 20 years actually with one company, a global company, which I think is quite unusual in this day and age, but had a number of different opportunities. So started in sales, did a lot of management and leadership roles, but also had the opportunity to become head of innovation on the commercial side of the organization, which is kind of what led me to this field. So at the time, I knew very little about it. Creating an innovation program became part of my Black Belt Sigma. But for those of you in the know or not in the know, it's very much a continuous improvement methodology. I also was the change lead in the UK. Again, that importance of people, so bringing both the process and people together. And 10 years ago, I kind of had enough of corporate life and just wanted to do something completely different. And Ideas UK is an organization I came across when I had an innovation program. And I'll be honest, I fell into quite a few traps when I launched my innovation program. We talk more about that later, I'm sure. But it was speaking to individuals I'd never come across on almost a daily basis, people in government or people in a bank, for example, that really helped me to kind of redevelop and reestablish and relaunch my innovation program at the time. So 10 years ago, I became the operations director for Ideas UK. As you rightly mentioned, we're a UK-based organization and our ethos is all about really embedding innovation into every organization. But interestingly, I know you're more based in the UAE. We have a large following in the UAE too. And I think now for at least 15, if not 20 years, have been supporting organizations in the UAE to really develop their capabilities too. I guess the final thing to say about me personally, I feel like I'm talking a lot now, but I guess that is the point of a podcast.
That is the point.
Is that stop talking, we wouldn't have much, would we? Is the fact that alongside kind of the process improvement and the methodology that I have on board in terms of theory, obviously have run a program myself. And I always think when you're kind of working with somebody who's actually been there and kind of worn the t-shirt, as we might say, it really helps. I'm also an emotional intelligence practitioner. And again, it's that human quality that we can really bring to innovation that I think is even more critical in today's fast-paced world. So I'm also fortunate enough to sit on the British Standards Group for Innovation, and more recently, the Global Innovation Standards have been published, ISO 56000. And actually, if anyone is kind of new to the innovation game, they're a great place to get started. But more personally, I'm married. I live in the Devon countryside. It's very green and very beautiful, but really in the middle of nowhere. So pretty much I have farmers and sheep as neighbours, which is quite lovely. I'm very into gardening. And I don't just grow vegetables. I grow award-winning vegetables in our local show.
Well, that sounds very
that's
innovative.
my hobby.
Even your hobbies are innovative and winning. I love it. I love it. So
can't quite get that sales out of me.
So just so I correctly understand, you, as part of your role at the large pharmaceutical company, you created an innovation project, or and then you created another one after that of your own.
Yeah, so the innovation program I created whilst, I think the same name, MSD in the UK, Merck globally. I think it's an interesting pharmaceutical companies because on the research and development side, we're seen as really innovative, bringing cutting edge technologies, vaccines, devices to the market. But actually on the commercial side, we pretty much do things the way we've always done things. So I was kind of tasked to take on the commercial side of things in the UK and to look at what we could do to enhance the way we sold our products, the way we interact with customers, the benefits that we can really bring to patients. Was it a complete success? I don't think it was a complete success. Was it a huge learning curve? Absolutely massive. And does it kind of give me the perfect way to help other companies? Absolutely, because I think if there was a trap, I fell into it. So it was just kind of clawing my way back out to make things work. That really supports me, I think, to help others. And no, it's not always plain sailing when it comes to innovation.
So once you did that innovation program, you just thought, okay, this is for me. I can't get away from it. I don't want to do chemistry anymore. And IDEAS UK seems like a really good fit from that point of view. Tell us a little bit more about the work that IDEAS UK does, and especially, I guess, the overseas elements, which surprised me a little bit when we first met.
Yeah, so IDEAS UK has been in existence now for around 40 years. So we've always had a large following in the UK, and we are not industry specific. So we really do work with any organisation that wants to share their knowledge, learn from others, build their capabilities when it comes to innovation. I guess in a way we specialise more in workplace innovation. So really it's about the employee voice. Yes, of course, we're interested in the latest technology. I love ChatGPT. I love a bit of AI, but equally it's about building those capabilities, supporting organizations to really have a process in place to take an idea all the way through to implementation to really add value to the organization. So in terms of what we offer as an organization, we are a membership organization. So there's that great opportunity to be able to just talk to other people who do the same job as you, but just in a different industry. And I'm sure we'll get into more about what does innovation look like in different industries. But actually, there are so many similarities. And we never ask people to share their IP or their actual ideas, but it's about sharing how you go about things and helping each other and supporting each other to really enhance your own programs, to build programs that really work within the culture of your organization, that really deliver the results that you need them to deliver to add value to your organization, whatever that may look like. So we're very inclusive. We really thrive on that diversity. As you mentioned, I think, many, many years ago now, I know it was kind of a mandate from the Dubai government that every organization would ring fence part of their budget in Dubai to really kind of accelerate their innovation capability and what they deliver. And I mean, every time I go back, I've been coming to the UAE for 10 years now, in that time, a canal's been built through Dubai. There's always a new skyscraper, the building a new airport, there's always something new. There's the world's deepest, highest, longest, deep dive Dubai. We've been there. There's always something new, something innovative. They're always pushing the boundaries. And actually supporting that kind of development of that capability is such an honor, actually, to work with some of these amazing organizations, to work with absolutely fabulous individuals who are so passionate about what they do and really kind of delivering results for the organization, for the country too, and for kind of their clients and customers, whoever they may be, whoever they work with. It really is an honor and a pleasure. And we kind of help them build that capability. I think it helps that everybody who kind of works with and is associated with Ideas UK has delivered an innovation program themselves. So I know that, when I was in corporate, I was on so many initiatives where we'd have this huge consultancy firm come in. They'd spend 6 months with us. They'd deliver a solution. They'd walk away. And 18 months later, we'd be repeating the process because actually they didn't know our culture. They'd not actually done it themselves. They'd not lived it themselves. And I think at Ideas UK, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We're not a massive consultancy. We don't charge mega bucks. We're really there to support companies to develop their own capabilities, to really share our lived experience with those organizations to really support them to kind of develop themselves and enhance what they're already doing.
Okay, so I think we need to take a slight step back because innovation is quite a broad term. So it was interesting when you said at the beginning that you're in chemistry and then you, move completely away to innovation. So for me, anything science, I feel like science and innovation go hand in hand in my own mind. So it's interesting that you said that. So I think innovation is probably a very broad term. What does it actually mean in practice?
I think actually getting some definitions kind of out of the way early is probably a good start, because I think when people think innovation, they're often thinking about creativity. They're thinking about coming up with new ideas. It's kind of the fun, sexy bit when everyone's involved in a brainstorm session, for example, and people think, oh yeah, that's innovation. But really that is just creativity. It's us being our human selves, being creative, coming up with ideas. Innovation is more than that. Innovation is about the implementation of those creative ideas in order to really generate value. And that often is through increased income, reduced operational costs, or both. And actually, I'd say it's beyond that now, that added value. It could be environmental or social impacts. It could be, employee well-being. It could be really customer satisfaction. So that kind of definition of added value is critical. It's about implementing those ideas to add value. But what that value is can differ between different organizations. So if you think, for example, about delivering a service to an organization, innovation could show up in terms of reducing the timeframes to get information across or to deliver that service. It could show up in terms of really satisfying your customer. So what's going to really delight your customer? So they're kind of return clients almost, something that they're going to tell their friends about. So then you get other business. It could be about simplifying internal processes. Often we do something because we've always done it that way, and nobody's really stopped to think that something doesn't need 4 or 5 sign-offs when actually 1 or 2 would do. Or it could just be having a program within your organization so employees feel heard. They feel that they've got somewhere to go when they come up with ideas. that can really increase morale, that increases retention. And actually, even that has a knock on to your bottom line, because then people, are not this churn of individuals. You retain employees, and therefore, it costs a lot to train somebody, to get them established. And you stop that churn, and also you start attracting really great people who want to then come and work for your organization as well. So that value can show up in many, many different ways, but it really is about implementing those ideas and not just having that brainstorming session, having a load of fun, having loads of ideas or post-its or captured in some sort of IT system, and then nothing happens, because there's nothing worse than that.
Understood, yeah, because I always think of innovation as ideas. Basically, you're coming up with something that's completely different. It's way left field. It's going to change the future forever, but I guess it could be a lot smaller, could be incremental.
Absolutely. And I think I often hear people say, oh, I'm not innovative, I can't get involved, I don't know where to start. And I think part of that is down to our perception and how we think and feel about innovation. So if, even I'm thinking about innovation, the first thing that might come to my mind is, the first Apple iPhone, for example, or, Uber totally disrupting the taxi market, or Airbnb disrupting, the hotel market, or, some innovative probe that's being sent to the moon, or Elon Musk's Starlink, which I'm on today and works brilliantly, but a totally new concept in terms of, being able to kind of bring us connectivity. But in all, being totally honest, I'd say 90% of innovation is the much lower end. It's that kind of continual improvement. Innovation is very, very much a spectrum. And you have got all of that amazing, huge, almost world-changing ideas at the far right-hand side. On this left-hand side, if you think about this as a continuum, they've got continuous improvement. It is about, simplifying the processes. It is about just thinking about what could we do better tomorrow than we do today. And everybody is capable of doing just one thing slightly better tomorrow than they've done today. It's about identifying those kind of gaps and where can we just make a small tweak. And actually, if everyone across an organization was doing that, then you get really kind of massive efficiencies in terms of just how you operate as an organization. To be honest, though, I think there's other things that can sometimes get in the way when we innovate. And I think one of those is time as well. And it's this kind of constant balance between business as usual, having to deliver for our customers today, having to, produce and, get the sales in so we hit our bottom line. And it's how you balance that with business as usual versus the time to just stop, think, and what could we do better? Do we need, as I say, 5 different processes when one would do, for example? And I guess then there's also the inevitability that innovation does come with a level of risk. And you started by talking about this being quite a regulated industry. Obviously, my background's in a regulated industry. And whenever you mention the word risk, there's a fear factor involved. There's compliance that start to get a little bit toe curly about it. And so there are different factors. I think that perception piece, the time, the innovating versus business as usual, but also that level of risk that needs to be managed. So we stay within the guidelines and we're not breaking any rules, but also we start kind of just pushing things very gently. And I think if you start thinking about innovating at that more continual improvement level, it can kind of build your risk tolerance as an organization. Everybody can get involved because everybody's capable of making improvements. It's about having a growth mindset, having a great place to work, really. And we're really all capable of just delivering those small changes. I think it's how we think about innovation and how we perceive it.
So what are the drivers of innovation then? Say in an organization, is it an idea, or is it a problem, or is it both? And I guess, some industries, you mentioned regulated industries, I guess competition would be a driver because I guess in pharmaceuticals, you need to be ahead of the competition. Otherwise, because you want your drug or whatever you're creating to be the one that's bought. See, so what are the drivers? Where do they start?
So I think it's really different for every organization. However, I think what we have in common, and I'm sure you've heard this term VUCA, it stands for like volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it's kind of the world that we are all living in. You know, this volatile nature of everything. It's this rapid change, kind of, it can be very unpredictable. What's the, latest technology that's going to come up? How do we need to adjust? And that leads to this uncertainty. So, although, people talk about forecasting all the time now, actually, it can be quite difficult to forecast what's next, what's on the horizon, what's the next big thing that's going to have a major shift. I mean, nobody could have predicted COVID and the worldwide impact that would have had on us. And I think, the world is very complex. We are all very interrelated. You're sat in the UAE, I'm sat in the UK. We're having this conversation. And there are so many different parts. There are so many different and diverse perspectives to take into account. And it's also quite ambiguous. So we often lack clarity. And I think one of the key things is to really understand as an organization why you want to innovate. I think everyone wants to do it because it sounds a bit sexy and, it's what we should be doing. But why? Really understanding actually what is your driver? Is it that you are in a very competitive environment and you need to start delighting customers, otherwise they're going to go elsewhere? Is it that, the products you currently sell just are not fit for the market anymore because the market has moved on so much? So it is kind of really understanding and taking time to really think about why you want to innovate. I mean, there are so many great quotes out there around innovation and lots of great quotes from Einstein. And he says, if I had an hour to save the world, I spend 55 minutes planning. And actually, although that sounds really not innovative at all, totally buy into that. It is all about planning, understanding why you want to do it, the intent behind why you need to innovate, being really clear, having clarity on the goals to really kind of what value do you want to add to the organization? What value do you want to add to your clients? And I think that's just critical.
So let's look at professional services then, because a lot of our viewers and listeners are in professional services. So what kind of innovation, I guess, projects or initiatives or requirements have you seen from professional services companies?
So when we look at kind of professional services, I mean, again, it's probably very obvious, and we've just talked a lot about, or my passion about human, but it often shows up as tech-aided delivery, let's be honest. I think there's a lot of AI, automation, big data analytics, and that all helps to provide a faster, kind of more predictable, even more personalized service to the client. I think there's also kind of a lot of innovation going on in the type of business models as well, and how we offer the services to clients. But also, I think you can have some kind of non-tech related innovation too. And just thinking of a couple of examples that I know of kind of more recently is, a law firm that were set up that wanted to break away from the kind of traditional model where a kind of a client walks into your office and they have their allocated time slot with you and you deliver an end-to-end service. And they really set out to do things differently. And initially, you might not think, well, this is really innovative. But actually, as I say, if we think about innovation being on that spectrum, it is, they do is really ensure the client is at the center of all decisions. They specialize in family law, which can be highly emotive, quite highly charged in some circumstances. And they go to the client. So, if the client wants to meet at their workplace, they go to the client's workplace. So it kind of is reducing the stress for the client. It's kind of really helping to kind of support them in the best way possible. And although you might not think that that's not innovative, they're just going to the client's office rather than it's different. It's that little differentiator that can really make a difference to the client. They also do things like unbundle all of their services. So rather than pay for, a kind of a total solution from start to finish, you might just need them to do one or two elements for you. And then you can, again, specifically just pay for the one or two elements, which again reduces cost. It reduces the stress of, can I afford this? So I think there are little things that people are doing that can really make a difference to their clients. Thinking of a completely different example in the prison service. So again, very regulated. They kind of initiated mental health is a huge issue amongst prisoners. I think it's a huge issue in the general public and probably heightened since COVID. And they've trained, barbers that go in and cut the prisoners' hair to be able to almost offer a counselling service to kind of talk one-on-one just about any issues that are facing them, to be able to signpost them to help. That is a completely non-tech solution. Tech doesn't get involved in the slightest, but it's, again, bringing up that human connection to really make a difference to an individual. And I think that's where us as humans really do need to step up. Computers do things we tell them to do. So actually, when it comes down to it, we're still key in the kind of innovation journey, however much tech can really support us.
So if you have a problem, an organization has a problem, and you can see that some change needs to be made, whether it's in processes or in products or in services, where do you start? Where should a company start?
So in terms of where they start, well, obviously they can just pick up the phone and have a chat with us. So I'd suggest that would be number one. But if they want to do it themselves, I think an ideal place to start is to really understand what they need. So I know when I started my innovation program, I said, give us any ideas, any ideas at all. And I, in the nicest possible way, although we say there are no bad ideas, can we have a dog walking service? Can we have a crash? Can we have a swimming pool? Can we? And it was just a list of wants, quite honestly. And in terms of really adding value to the organization or to the patients that we served, it didn't add that much value at all.
Okay.
So I think it's really having clarity. So rather than innovating for the sake of it, where do you really want to change? And I think kind of that, I know we didn't have a specific example, but the way you just discussed it in terms of, if a company has identified a problem, then that is the perfect place to start. And we talk a lot about kind of campaigns in innovation. So it is where you have identified a problem or an opportunity, and then you really design a campaign to harvest the ideas from all of the individuals. So it's all about having a very clear objective, really knowing the scope or the focus. So almost putting guide rails around what you do and don't want. And I think that's where the kind of, particularly in a regulated industry, the kind of compliance piece comes into it. It may sound counterintuitive, but I'd almost say know your end point. So not the type of innovations that you may get, but actually the goal, the value that you want to add. Because then if you do get lots of ideas in, you can kind of almost measure those ideas in how close are they to getting you to your end goal. Because particularly, if you've got a big organization and you send out a challenge to the organization and you invite lots of ideas in, then you're going to get lots of ideas, and only a certain number of those can be taken forward. So kind of almost knowing your end goal can really help in terms of then being able to filter those ideas in terms of which might be useful. I think very much if you're doing this internally, then having a really clear call to action. So what do you want from your employees? What do you want them to come up with? Do you want them to be sharing their ideas? Do you want them to go away in groups and have a bit of a chat about the problem and come back with a group solution? So just be very clear in terms of your call to action. And make sure, I think, that almost that statement around the problem is simple enough for everyone to understand, but almost meaty enough that people kind of get why. So kind of really sharing with people why this is important to the organization and why you really want to take this forward is critical. The one other thing I would also say is before you kind of launch this into your company is really think about what are you going to do with those ideas. So if you've asked everyone for their ideas to solve a certain problem, what are you going to do next? So you really need to have, again, it comes back to planning and Einstein's quote, to have all of the kind of steps in play. So who's going to evaluate all of those ideas? Who's going to decide which ideas you take forward? Have you got the funds, the budget, the time to be able to evaluate those ideas and then do something with them? Because actually, if you're not prepared to do something with those ideas, and bearing in mind, if you've kind of got the right problem, this is an important problem to your organization. It isn't just innovating for the sake of innovating. You've spent time to identify a particular area, but actually, if you haven't decided, in 6 weeks' time, I'm going to close this campaign and then we need to do something with these ideas, everyone is like, well, nothing happened. And so therefore, if you want to do the same again, people are going to go, well, why am I going to bother? Because you didn't do anything with my ideas last time. So I think it's that, have all of your ducks in a row before you start. That's critical.
So it sounds like planning is absolutely key. And it's almost like you need to know the answer to the solution before you could sort of start the innovative process, the plan. And as you mentioned earlier, that's where you started, is because you, obviously in the pharmaceutical company you're working in, there was a challenge or more, and you were tasked with, coming up with some solutions to that challenge. So you mentioned a lot about getting people to put their heads together, brainstorming, group thinking. Is that usually a good approach?
Yeah, I think it's a great approach. I'm still a huge fan of it. I mean, these days, I think, you can type in your problem to whichever is your favorite AI engine, and it will probably spit out a load of ideas for you. So I think we've got that, which we never used to have. And it's still like a human part of the process, because you still need to kind of almost enter that challenge correctly. I mean, in some companies, they're told when they enter the organization, you have two jobs. You have a job that we have employed you for, and then your second job is to improve things. And, the whole ethos of the company is built towards continuous improvement. And so that can be a solo activity, or that can be a team activity. Some organizations are brilliant at literally every week, the manager might do a floor walk in a factory, for example, identify a couple of issues, and then people solve it through that week. So there are lots of different ways you can go about brainstorming or coming up with ideas solo, but often, ideas are so much more robust if many minds have worked together on it. So something like a brainstorming technique can be brilliant. And I mean, there are books and books written on, the best brainstorming techniques. I've got my personal favorites. I'm sure other people have too. But actually, it's a really fun activity to do. It can be really motivational, particularly when you're trying to solve an actual problem for the organization. It really feels like you're all kind of getting up to something together, and that you almost have a say in the kind of future direction of the organization. So it can be so great. As I said, I think we've used the word morale before, but so great for that kind of feeling of belonging, which is so critical for organizations as well, to have employees that want to be there and actually want to give their ideas and make that organization the best it can be. And then you're really on a winning streak with everything.
It's interesting you mentioned, AI and AI, LLMs and technology versus people. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been working on some business planning for 2026 and thinking, okay, what are my service offerings going to look like? Do we need to innovate, or do we need to sort of change the focus a little bit to make things even more successful? And I have to say, the conversations I've had with people have been much more inspirational and informed than what I have with the LLM. So I just spent probably 12, 16 hours this weekend using a couple of different LLMs to bounce the ideas off and to try and get inspiration. And what it's come out with at the end after all that time is not impressive. It just hasn't, I'm like, this doesn't really solve my problem. But the solutions that other people have given me do go much closer to that. It's then just okay, so you've got the ideas, you've got the inspiration. It's then, and this is actually funnily what ChatGPT was saying to me, you've got Chris, you've given me too much. You've got too many ideas and too many sources. You need to stop and narrow that right down. Is this a challenge generally with working on innovative ideas? Is just having too much too many sources or too much source information or ideas, and not being able to see, what to choose?
Well, first off, I'm so pleased that you said you got so much more richness from the conversations that you have, because I don't think AI should ever take away us having these one-to-one conversations and really listening to people. For me, empathy is a critical kind of part of emotional intelligence, and actually a critical part of innovation. Being able to understand what your client, your customer, or even if it's a business to business, that other business needs, being able to kind of stand in their shoes and really listen. And I think listening is a skill that has sometimes kind of gone out the window a bit in the digital age. It's all emails, it's all tech. And do we really stop and listen to people? So I love the fact that the conversations you had still were king. And I still do encourage people to have conversations and be curious. Equally, you're right. When you tend to kind of, as I say, whether it's campaign, and ideally, as I say, campaigns are the way I would always go, is you get lots of ideas, and that's a great thing. But you almost need a funnel. You need to be able to filter those ideas down. And that's why kind of almost having the end in mind can really help. And there are different methodologies that people use, but, there are kind of probably a few key things. It's like, does this idea align to our strategy? Novelty could be something you want to look for in an idea, or it may not be, and your definition of novelty. So is novelty completely new to the world, or is it just new to your company? And that might be novel enough. How feasible is this? It might be brilliant to fly people between offices, but in all realism, you can't quite do it yet. So there are kind of different criteria around feasibility, novelty, the impact, the level of impact an idea might have. And actually, if you kind of use some of these kind of key criteria, that's how you can then filter down your ideas into the ideas that you think at this point in time are the ideas that are most likely to give you the outcome you're looking for. It doesn't mean that, the flying people between offices, for example, isn't a good idea. It just means it's not a good idea, or it's not feasible today. So actually keep it on the back burner, because you never know when that might become a possibility. But it's about what's those feasible ideas today. And by putting kind of some criteria in place, and again, you can set that criteria in advance so and everybody else knows, what should my idea be ticking? What are you looking for in an idea? And then, you can narrow down those ideas to those maybe 2, 3, 4, might be even 5 ideas that you just try piloting. So rather than, totally switching your business model, try and sometimes it's called kind of pocket universes. Just try and pilot in a very small way, maybe with 1 or 2 clients, for example, just to see their thoughts. And I think the other great thing that you can do, if it's possible, if compliance allows it, is as you did in terms of talking to clients, bring your clients into brainstorming sessions, get them involved. Talk to them about what they would really want. If you've got several different offerings or several different ideas, get them involved in which idea might be more palatable, might really delight them moving forward. So again, the more you can keep the client, the individual, the end user at the forefront of that design process, all the way through your innovation process, I think the better it is in terms of actually coming up with an end point that is going to be, again, add value, which is all about what innovation should do.
Yeah, there are a few interesting things I got out of what you just said, and listening was one of the important things, I think, because you mentioned you should run this idea by a client or 2, or pilot it with 1 or 2 clients. I guess the idea or the inspiration or whatever probably should have come from you having listened to your clients previously. So I'm thinking, I'm thinking of lawyers or accountants or something like that. It would be probably, if you're listening well enough to your clients and understanding what they're saying and analyzing, I guess, what they're saying almost, then you can then, I think, realize what problems need to be solved and what that end goal needs to be in order to actually be innovating or having ideas about the right thing. And obviously, if you can pilot it with those. So, as an example, when I was doing this research over the weekend, I did look back at calls that I had with clients and think, and I ask from these transcripts, what actual business issues have these clients raised in our conversations? And it was really surprising to me how many were pretty much the same, repeated. Not what I thought, not what I need more clients. It was a lot around operations. It's all around, I don't have enough time. I'm spending too much time trying to do everything. Things like this that every single company out of the little, the group that I put together said the same thing, and it hadn't really, I hadn't drawn that together. So it's really struck me that listening and having that data is really, really important.
Absolutely. And I think it was Stephen Covey who identified kind of almost levels of listening, and also like the barriers to listening. When we're talking to somebody, there are so many different barriers. We can be daydreaming, we can be thinking about what we need to cook for tea, we can be, this is a classic one for sales, kind of you hear a key word and then you're just in there because you know how to handle that keyword. There's so many barriers that get into the way. Distractions, mobile phones buzzing, so many distractions that go on. So really, truly kind of empathetically listen to somebody. So you're not only hearing the words, but you're really seeing the sentiment behind those words as well. And I think that is so key. And being able to keep that client at the forefront all the way through your innovation process is really super, because innovation is a process, and just like any other process, it should be repeatable. And I might just go slightly away from, the listening piece, but actually you have to have an intent. Why are you innovating? I've come back to this why so often. And you need to identify those opportunities. And I think a great way to identify those opportunities is just, as you said, to truly listen to your clients, or if you've been having lots of complaints lately, what's driven those complaints? How can you eliminate that complaint? If you've had some really lovely feedback, what's driven that great feedback, and how can you repeat that more often? But then if you think about the process of innovation, once you've identified that opportunity, it's all about creating the concepts, where your brainstorming comes into this, where you're kind of launching your campaign into your organization comes into this, where you even maybe get in a client focus group to talk about what would really delight you, for example. Then you need to validate those concepts, and it can be as simple as, the criteria I just mentioned, the kind of feasibility, the novelty, the kind of, is it financially viable, for example. Then you start developing one or two solutions. And again, even at this stage, you want to be taking that back to the client. You don't want to be going all the way through this process and going, keep your end user on board all the way through. And then you're deploying those solutions. And it doesn't just stop there. It's then all about, have you added the value that you wanted to add? Is this really going to deliver something new, something exciting, something the customer wants to buy from you, or something that's going to just engage the client more with your organization rather than going somewhere else, particularly when, margins might be very small in terms of cost, for example. So what are you doing to really delight your customer that another firm aren't? And therefore somebody's going to come to you rather than that other firm, or you're going to retain your existing clients as well. And hopefully they're going to talk positively about their experience. So there's that word of mouth element as well.
And we briefly mentioned before about the outcome or the end goal. And I want to circle back to that because thinking about my own challenges I was looking at, my own problems I wanted to solve. how clear does your end goal need to be? How much clarity do you need to have? In other words, so can you just say, my problem is I want more revenue? Or do you have to be much, much more specific than that in order to actually, solve the problem, in order to get the right ideas and the right innovations in to get the results you want to get to? Ultimately, whatever you do will lead to more revenue, but I'm guessing it has to be a little bit more micro than that.
Yes. So I would suggest that when we're talking about really understanding our problem, I think we all want more revenue. Don't get me wrong. I think that would probably be a commonality across every single organization, public or private sector.
Mm-hmm.
However, I would say it's about delving a little more into what exactly do you want? Is there a new opportunity on the horizon? Is there a real something that's keeping you awake at night? When you keep circling back to it, you think, why am I not doing that? Or, my clients keep asking me for this, but it's not something I currently deliver. How could I do it? And again, it kind of comes back to that, almost that problem statement, and being able to construct kind of a real statement that, even if it's not something, you're a one-man band and it's not something that you're kind of taking out to a bigger organization, it's kind of giving clarity for you. And I think again, it's an acronym from Six Sigma. And I don't know how it came into being, but I know it as kind of Tim Woods. And some of this will apply even in the service industry. Some of it's much more for manufacturing. So you can think of it in terms about understanding where the biggest wastes are, for example. So is it about T stands for transportation of items or information? So, are there times where you're sending things backwards and forwards a lot that actually you don't need to be doing that? Is it about inventory? Are you creating something before it's required? And again, maybe that's more manufacturing than a service industry, but it could be that you're writing lots of documents that, for example, aren't needed. So that's taking a lot of your time. It could be about motion within the workspace. So again, if you work in an office with different people, you continually walking between different departments and all over the place. And again, to get sign off, for example, that isn't required. And that, I think, then comes into the kind of waiting for information. So if you're thinking of, we've just done Tim, now we're on the Woods. So, how often do you just waste time because you're waiting for somebody to reply to you, or waiting for, all of those LinkedIn, invites you sent out for people to accept? Then you've got kind of your two O's, the over processing and over production. So again, it's about doing extra work that you don't need to be doing. And the D stands for defects. So, how often do we send something out and then there's spelling mistakes in it, or, it doesn't quite hit the mark, and then we're redoing that work. And again, that's eating into valuable time, valuable hours. And I guess the final S is skills, not using people to their full ability. So kind of almost sometimes one of the ways we can think about why we're innovating is to look at where we're wasting our time, where we're wasting our effort, where, we are doing things that are not adding value to the organization or to the client. And we're doing them because it might be fun to do them, or we're doing it just because we've always done it that way. And we've never stopped to think that we could do it another way. So there's kind of one angle is the wastes, but then the other angle is obviously listening to the client. And what are they saying they want? I mean, there is like the classic example of, I think, Ford, when he said, if I'd asked my clients what they wanted, my customers, they'd have said they wanted a faster horse before the motor car was invented. And there is an element of, we don't know what we want until suddenly it's there. I'd have never told you 3 or 4 years ago that I needed ChatGPT in my life. But when it crashed one day, when I went to use it, I was devastated. I was like, oh my goodness, how am I going to start my presentation without them at least giving me some sort of guidance? And, sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. So, listen to your clients, get the sense of what they want. But actually, sometimes we need to be pushing that envelope slightly for individuals, because sometimes we just, as I say, We don't know what we don't know.
Speaking of losing ChatGPT, imagine when the internet's gone down. It quite rarely happens these days, but when the internet goes down, you realize just how much you rely on it. You rely on it for watching TV often. You know, a lot of things don't come over
Streaming.
the air anymore. It's all streamed. Even if it's a terrestrial TV channel, it's often through the phone lines or through fiber or something like that. But you can't do anything. When the internet goes down, there is almost nothing you can do. You can read a book. That's pretty much all you can do. And go for a walk, do some exercise. There's very little else you can really do. And then, goodness help us if electricity stops working. If we have a power outage, then it really is nothing you can do.
Now, we do get some of those occasionally.
Yeah, definitely. I thought, if ever in the Middle East, in UAE, in the middle of summer, we lost power, we'd be in a little bit of trouble. Luckily, we've got very reliable power grids, but yeah, it's it'll be a very hot environment. Let's put it that way. You want to have a lot of water on standby. So you mentioned we've talked a lot about being quite structured with planning your ideas and planning your innovations. And you also fun is a word that you use. Can you just ever just take a chance and just do something for fun? Just think it'd be really nice to try this new thing just for fun. Does that work? I mean, some of these greatest inventions must have come from just a problem, but must have been from someone just saying it'd be really fun to I don't know, throw myself down a hill or something like that.
Do you know what? Absolutely. And I think it's probably, me in terms of an individual that prefers to almost have those guide rails in place and to know I'm doing something for a reason. I'm sure, some of the best entrepreneurs have just gone, shouldn't we do this? Now, there's an element of doing things for fun, but there's also an element of, at the end of the day, you need to add that value. Because if you just do something for fun, like, I don't know, in Cheddar, you talked about throwing yourself down a hill. We throw massive cheeses down a hill, big wheels of cheese, and then people run down after them and they get broken legs and it's all very messy. And I'm sure they just do that for fun. I don't think it's that fun at the bottom when you've got like so many bruises and broken bits. But they just do that for fun. But how you would turn that into a value add for the organization, if you come back to the truest sense of kind of definition of innovation, I think that's the critical thing. Brainstorming can be brilliant fun, and you're all together and you can come up with really wild and wacky ideas, and there are really kind of more fun methodologies, or let's come up with ideas that will get us fired, and then you can like dial them back a bit, but you start thinking bigger in a way. But at the end of the day, it should still add value to an organization, because unless you're implementing ideas that add value, it's not innovation. So it does sound very processy, and it does almost sound counterintuitive that innovation is a process. But then equally, when you're in quite a regulated industry, maybe that can be a comforting factor that actually, I've got guide rails in place and we can do this. And it is possible to do things differently and really add value to the organization without being too wacky. I mean, we just talked about the internet going down, and where I live is in the heart of countryside, and we do not have super vast broadband. So our dial-up speed is single digits. And I wouldn't be able to do this. I wouldn't be able to live where I live and work from home. And actually, even, the next step up to that here is like airband technology, where it pings off a mobile phone mast. And I had that for the first year I was here, and it still kept crashing all the time. So again, on this conversation, I would have probably dropped out at least once because it was fine for the streaming, but actually when it came to this, it couldn't handle it. So it was only not even a year ago I swapped to Starlink. Now, that's Elon Musk. Now, whatever you think of the man, I mean, he has vision. And to think, and the cost of putting all those satellites into the sky to provide internet pretty much worldwide, yes, I pay a bit more for it. It gives me a consistent speed. And what it does for me is it takes out my worry, my concern that I might drop out of this conversation, because it doesn't tend to drop out. So it doesn't just give me internet, and that's the feature. The benefit to me is peace of mind, that I can work, that I can live where I want to live, I can have conversations, I can do coaching, I can deliver training, and that internet connection is going to be stable. And before I didn't have that, I was constantly worried, do I have to drive somewhere else to get better internet? So it's not just about the features of a product that add value to an individual. It's about the benefit that brings the individual. And sometimes that's really hard to measure. For me, it was peace of mind when it came to my internet. You can't really measure that. I could probably measure it if I was hooked to a blood pressure monitor, but you can't really measure that. But
Well, it makes
sometimes
it
it's
very
not
hard
just...
to do your job without that reliable internet. Like you can't, you have to
Exactly.
then go to an office. You can't have the option to work from home. You can't have the flexibility of working out of hours if you really want to. And so
Absolutely.
you can't live where you're living now to do your job.
Exactly. And I think that's the difference. Sometimes when we innovate and we think we're adding value in a certain way, so we're reducing a time frame or we're making a process simpler, it's not just about reducing the time frame. It's also about what that might give the individual in terms of reduced stress levels or confidence that you're really delivering on what you say you're going to deliver. So there are lots of other intangible benefits, I think, to some of the value that we deliver that we can't always measure. And actually measuring can be quite hard. Getting the return on investment, if it's like literally a cost saving, it's easy. If it's literally we're selling more, it's kind of easy. But measuring that kind of feeling can be much, much harder as well, to really kind of highlight the true value of innovation and the true value innovation can bring.
Now, I'm interested to hear about #fail. There must be, for all the successes, there must be so many failures and experiments when you're trying to innovate. Are you able to give us some examples of some massive fails that you've seen?
So I guess I don't get shown all of the massive fails. Interestingly, we at Ideas UK do an audit with organisations, and we have added a question in about failure because it's almost like a dirty word. So although if you're really into innovation, that most of the stuff is going to fail, or most ideas are never going to see it past that idea stage. They're just going to stay as thoughts on a paper. But actually talking about failure can be really difficult for some organizations. And I think the organizations that can really embrace failure are the organizations that can really succeed. So I work with a lot of the UK governments and founded a kind of cross-government innovation group. And one of the government organizations do a failure of the week. So, on a Monday morning, it's right, what didn't work last week? And it's not about blame. And I think blame is a huge enemy of innovation. If you start going, whose fault is this? It is not going to work. It's not a psychologically safe environment. But if you can go, okay, what didn't work last week? Hands up, everyone's got to share a thing. Actually, it makes failure much more open and acceptable, and it's okay to try. The biggest failure is then not trying at all. Innovation is always taking a leap of faith, because there is always a risk that it's not going to work. But it is about, how do you manage that risk most effectively? How do you start small, for example? If you're going to plow £5 million into something, you're going to want to know it's a pretty safe bet. But if it's like free, or if you can, one person can spend a couple of days working on just a kind of concept that you could then share with your customers, then that's a really low risk way of kind of piloting innovation and taking kind of those small incremental steps towards a bigger solution. And I think the more we can get used to that, failing fast, I think is kind of the acronym that's often used around innovation. Let's fail fast and understand what went wrong, and then reiterate, because innovation, although we've talked about it as a process, there are process steps, but you need to go backwards and forwards lots of different times. So you might even get to a kind of, we think this concept's ready to go, and then the customers hate it. And then you have to go back again and, okay, which bits did they hate and what can we change? So it's all this kind of trial and error. And, you don't want to risk your company's reputation. You don't want to risk breaking the law. It's about how do you manage the risks? It's identifying those risks and putting in kind of mitigating practices for that as well.
Yeah, I guess it sounds like it's a team effort, because you would need potentially risk advisors. If you talk about the government, I guess the government by nature, I guess, has to innovate, has to push the boundaries a little bit to provide better services for less money. And they have departments, I guess, dedicated to that. Otherwise, we'd all be standing still. But yeah, it sounds like you need a team effort. You need risk advisors. You need people who have lots of ideas. You need people who are going to pull them back a little bit. And then you need those, stakeholders or decision makers who are willing to take a bit of a risk and understand there could be some failures. So it really seems like an overall team effort.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I think that's one of the great things about innovation, that can be a team effort. Obviously, you do get your entrepreneurs, your brilliant minds who come up with spectacular ideas and have that singularity of focus to deliver it. So there is that element too. Often within organizations, it's absolutely about a team approach. And I think one of the kind of early questions we started on was, people feel that innovation is not for them. But actually, there's lots of different roles within that innovation process. So yes, you've got your creatives that come up with all those ideas. And actually, given a structured problem to solve, I think anyone can come up with those ideas too. But equally, once you come up with those ideas, you do need your subject matter experts who can really analyze the data, analyze, what might happen to that ideas, almost do predictive modeling in some circumstances. Now, I couldn't do predictive modeling. You'd need an IT background to do that. So that's where your IT specialist comes in. You're going to want people who can really communicate to, as for example, who have that ability to really listen, who can really understand what clients want and what they think about it. Just lots of different people, lots of different skills that are required all the way through. Your compliance comes in. They help you with the guide rails. If you've got a great compliance officer, I did butt heads with mine quite often. We've got a great compliance officer. They can help you and, support you to go in the direction that you need to go in to get over the hurdles that are required. And then also, even at the end, when you've launched this, it's all about getting feedback from the customer. It's about somebody who's got an analytics or financial background to be able to, determine the return on investment. So there are different skills, and as individuals, we can all be part of that innovation process. Even if you feel that creativity is just not for me, as they go back to the beginning, it's all about doing something, better today than you did yesterday, or better tomorrow than you did today at the very basic level. But equally, there's all those different skill sets that are needed throughout the whole innovation process. That does mean it's a team game. Everyone can get involved. And again, it's that working on something together for a better purpose, to really support the organization, to really support the customer. We had a great saying in our pharmaceutical company that was, medicine was for the people. And when we remember that, the profits follow. And it is about, how do you really engage innovation with your strategy, with your vision to really kind of deliver for the people you deliver for. For us, it was the patients. What could we do? What could we create that really adds value to people who need our products the most? And I think when you've got that kind of real why that everybody can get around, that's not only data driven, but actually has that emotional connection. Communication is so key. If you want employees to, share their ideas, how can you not only tell them the facts of the problem, but connect emotionally to them, that they want to give their time, they want to give their ideas? That really, really, again, helps that end goal. But everybody has a role to play in the innovation process. However creative or innovative you think there's a role for everybody within the process.
So you had a dedicated role in innovation. Do companies
I
need
did.
to have an innovator, basically an innovative person or innovative team? Or is it just, again, a team effort, just getting different departments to just think?
So partly depends on the size of the organization. So I think, if you're a law firm and there's, 5, 10, 3, you don't need a dedicated innovation person. Let's be honest. I think you do need somebody who might drive the agenda, who is going to take time to analyze, or maybe you do it as a group to identify the kind of what's keeping us awake at night, or what could we really do? What opportunity are we missing? How are we losing clients? To do that piece of analysis, and then you work together on it. But when you have large organizations, we're talking kind of, there was 1,000 in my organization, probably, 500 plus. I think having that initial point of contact is perfect. I mean, our vision was that, 5 years after we started, innovation would just be what everybody is doing, and therefore you didn't need an innovation lead. But I think actually you do need somebody to kind of push the agenda, to just be that linchpin, to get people together, to be talking to senior leaders, to be identifying problems. It does help. And when I think about most of the organizations in the UAE, most of the government organizations, and actually private organizations, the larger ones in the UK, I'd say everybody does have not just an innovation lead, but often an innovation team. And that isn't to say that they own the innovation, because the business should own the innovation, but they're the people who have the skills, the capabilities, and can really add that drive. They're accountable for how innovation almost works within the organization. But actually, it's the organization as a whole that needs to kind of deliver not only the ideas, but actually take the lead in implementing those ideas as well.
So that beggars the question: what are the KPIs of that team? Because that is a lot of pressure. I would say, like, you have to come up with 3 new products this year, or you have to come up with 3 new services, or you have to improve, 5 services by the end of this year. That's a lot of pressure, and you've only got so much that's within your control. So what do the KPIs look like?
So it's a really interesting, actually, and the KPI should be, so in my mind, there should be this red thread that goes all the way through. It should start with the vision of the organization. What's the strategy, what you're trying to achieve? Then the innovation vision should be aligned to that. From the innovation vision, your objectives should fall out of it. And from the objectives, the KPI should fall out. So for me, there should be this kind of red thread all the way through, from the strategic vision of the organization down to your kind of KPIs. Often the KPIs are quite process orientated. So they are like the percentage of the employees engaged in innovation, the percentage of ideas that each employee gives, the number of ideas that each employee gives. So they're quite kind of numerical, they're quite easy. And they're often like almost the leading metrics. So, the how many people are doing this type of thing. I think the other metric that people often use are the kind of outcome metrics. So the return on investment. And, it's not unusual for kind of return on investments to be almost in that one, for every pound they spend on innovation, they get £10 back. If that's a kind of a really well operating program. And, there are certain organizations that, really, really thrive on the amount of revenue they generate or cost saving through innovation. So there's those kind of metrics too. Equally, I think in a more established system, you can look at, the number of partnerships, the number of IPs that you get granted, the kind of the different ways in which you're working. So there are so many metrics that you can use to measure and monitor innovation. And I don't think these days it's acceptable to just say, well, we don't do ROI because it's really hard. Because it is hard. I think you have to do it. And actually, the more you can do it, the more you then justify to the senior leadership that actually every pound you spend, I'm giving you £5 back. So therefore, I'm a really viable, valid part of this organization. So then people start to take note and are more likely to be inclined to, sponsor the bigger bets and the bigger opportunities out there. And in a way, when you've got a really established program, it is about having that range. So you do all of your continual improvement activities, and ideally that becomes more business as usual. And then the innovation team do focus on that more midterm, so things in 1 to 2 years, and then that longer term, which might be 10, 20 years down the line, and having kind of a innovation portfolio of those kind of different levels of innovation is really the kind of ideal nirvana for a lot of organizations. But again, it is what you want to do, because there's some organizations that are just really set up to do continuous improvement, and that's fine, and that really works for them. So it all comes back again to why you're doing it, and then linking those metrics to the value you're trying to add and what you were trying to solve in the first place, why you were doing innovation.
Well, you've given us a lot of really useful information today, Zena. Just to sum it up, and maybe this time bound is a little bit short, but if you had to give a simple 90-day approach for a professional services or a regulated industry, professional services are part of regulated industries in my mind. If you had to give a simple 90-day approach to a regulated industry organization, what would it look like?
So I would say if you've got 90 days, then you want to take that whole 90 days to do your planning and aim to launch on day 91. So everything can be in place for that launch date. I'm obviously going to say, pick up the phone and have a chat with me, because chat is free and we'll happily, help you. Even if you, obviously we'd like to encourage you to be members, but we'll happily just have conversations. So get in touch. So kind of highlight a good resource, which is the ISO's guidelines. We haven't really talked about them too much today, but ISO 56002, which is the guidance, gives you a real kind of sense of what needs to be in place for a well-run kind of innovation system. And that, I think, gives you a really good start in terms of, what leadership needs to be in place, what processes need to be in place, etc. So for that 90 days, I'd get started on identifying what the problem is going to, or the opportunity, or kind of why you want to innovate. Make sure that all of the senior leadership team are involved, because although, leadership could be a whole nother podcast, I think, but, that innovation and leadership around innovation is really critical for success to happen. And having everybody on the leadership team involved is really, really important as well. Talk to people who have, run innovation programs in other organizations and learn from them, because I think that really helps. And then get your process in place. What are you going to do if you kind of launched on day 91? You get loads of ideas in that 4 weeks. What are you going to do with those ideas? What process? How are you going to evaluate those ideas? What are you looking for? Who is going to do the evaluation? What funds are available? Because often they do need funds to be able to start, investigating, piloting, developing those ideas, and who's going to do that. So it is about, and again, I know it sounds really processy, but having that process in place to take those ideas all the way through to completion, having comms lined up, having, regular communication with people, getting kind of a bit of a buzz going when you do launch on day 91. All of these things you can do in that preparation phase before you actually go out there and launch. But that really is kind of key. And you can do some teasers as you're coming up to it, like got something new coming, we want to hear from you, your voice counts, whatever it is. But do your prep. And so when people do share their ideas, you can communicate back to them and do something with them. There are loads of software tools available now to really manage innovation, to manage ideas. And, again, with a larger organization, they're absolutely something to be investigated. But with a smaller organization, it's just about thinking about the time and the resources to really enable you to act on those ideas. Because the last thing you want to do, as I've mentioned before, is do nothing. Because then people are going to be really reluctant to ever share their ideas again.
That's very sage advice to end on, I think, Zena. So thank you very, very much for joining us today. It sounds to me like Ideas UK has a lot of resources available, people resources, but also I think other resources. So how can we get in touch with you with Ideas UK if we wanted to?
Yeah, so I'd love you to get in touch. As I say, we've got quite a broad brush, and it doesn't matter if you only have 2 or 3 in your organization or you're a, multi-thousand people organization. We work with everyone to support you. So we've got our website, which is www.ideasuk.com. You can send me an email direct, Zena, Zena, at ideasuk.com, or info, info, at ideasuk.com. So you can send us an email and get in touch, or you can obviously contact us through the website. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you, and we're always open to just sharing our experiences, sharing ideas, and linking you with other organizations too.
Thank you. Just to reiterate, so there is a UK in the name, but you're very much not limited to UK as a country or as UK companies. So you have a global resource, global access.
We do. We're based in the UK, but we very much are a global organisation. So yes, please don't let having the UK in the title stop you getting in touch. I think we have over 25 government organisations from Dubai who are part of the network, and we'd love to speak to anyone else too. So please do, drop us a line, www.ideasuk.com.
Very much looking forward to seeing you out in the UAE very soon then. Thank you, Zena Cox, for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you also to our audience for joining us today. If you're a professional leader or someone who works in regulated industries or professional services, innovation isn't just about disruption for the sake of it. It's about credibility, trust, staying relevant in environments where judgment really matters. But from what I've learned today, the end goal is very, very important. If you don't have a clear idea of your end goal, then you're going to struggle to measure that success or actually succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, share it with your network. For more insights, visit muhami.ae or connect with me at CJA Consulting. I'm Chris Adams. Till next time, stay informed, stay empowered. Thank you for joining us on Muhami Matters. If you found today's episode valuable, subscribe and connect with me to stay updated. Join me again soon as we continue to bring you credible insights, practical strategies, and trusted advice to empower your professional journey. I'm Chris Adams. Until next time, stay informed and stay empowered.